Is there a right way and a wrong way to read the Bible? Let's find out.
What in the world is the author trying to do? What are they doing with the words that they choose?
Hi, and welcome back to the show where I normally ask the question, what is the author trying to do? Today, we're going to look at why I asked that question and kind of the why behind this whole channel. There's a series of choices that readers of the Bible make, especially in evangelical Christianity in the West, that kind of get in their way and keep them from appreciating not only what the Bible's trying to do, but how it can fundamentally affect them and affect their lives. So today I would like to look at 5 of those, the top 5 things that I think we should stop doing when it comes to reading the Bible, and 5 things we should do in their place. The first thing is something that I'm sure you've heard before, and if you're anything like me, you've probably said it before, especially in a small group setting or maybe a Sunday school. And that's the phrase, what this means to me. Usually, a leader will ask a question about a particular Bible verse or a passage, and people in the group will answer the question by saying, well, this verse means fill in the blank to me. Or when we sit down to do our devotions in the morning with our coffee and our highlighters, we might sit down in our prayer journal and write what the passage that day meant to us. The problem with that kind of thinking is it takes the author of those texts, the author of those verses or the books or the passages, out of the driver's seat, and it puts us as the reader into the driver's seat. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it takes away agency from the person who wrote the letter or the book or the song or the prophecy, and it forces them to stand aside while we bend whatever it is that they wrote into something that fits with our current experience or our needs for that moment. That's not how any sort of communication really works. In fact, we don't even do that with literature. If we pick up a novel, we don't expect to bend the novel to fit our current circumstances. You don't pick up War and Peace and expect it to weigh in on whether or not you should wear blue socks that morning. But we do that with the Bible, and I think it comes down to a theological assumption that we make about the nature of the Bible, that it's some sort of magic 8-ball because God inspired it, where we can shake it and it will give us something each day that applies directly to our lives. And as nice as that thought is, I don't think it's actually what the Bible is trying to do. So what should we do instead of asking the question, what does it mean to me? I think we should ask the question that this whole channel is dedicated to asking, and that is, what is the author trying to do? It puts the author back in the driver's seat of a book or a passage of a verse, and it lets the author determine the meaning of that chunk of text. And I think it's really important for us to let the authors speak in their respective books of the Bible, because they have something that they're trying to do. They have something they're trying to say. And when they get a chance to say it, we'll appreciate it, I think, even more. In fact, that's how the Bible is supposed to work. The second problem is a little bit less of a problem, but it's also kind of a harder problem to address. And that's the habit of reading the Bible in broken up pieces over the course of a long period of time. Again, if you've spent any time in American Christianity, I'm sure you've run into a year-long or a 3-year-long Bible reading plan. And usually those plans take a little bit from the Old Testament every day, a little bit from the New Testament, maybe a psalm, maybe something from Proverbs, and they kind of throw it all into a bucket and expect you to read that every single day. And you do get through the whole Bible eventually, but you do it in a really piecemeal kind of fashion. No one in their right mind picks up a series of novels and reads a chapter from the first novel, a chapter from the 5th novel, and then, the appendix at the back of the 3rd novel, and expects to have any sort of working understanding of what's going on in the story of that series. And the same thing's true of the Bible. The Bible is structured so that each book builds on the ones that came before it. The authors of later books constantly allude back to the material in books that came before them in the order of the Bible. And we miss those allusions, we miss those connections, we miss that building story when we don't read it in order. When people ask me, well, then how should I read the Bible? Should I use a reading plan? I think you should, and there's plenty of them out there, but read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. And if you really want to develop a deep appreciation for how the Bible works together as a collective whole, do it all in 3 months. Read it cover to cover in 90 days. The third problem is one that I see a lot in people who have spent a little bit more time reading the Bible. They've got a little bit of practice. Maybe they don't say what this verse means to me. Maybe they've read the Bible a couple of times through cover to cover. And it's a focus on the wrong characters in the story. Throughout the Bible, one of the things that comes up a lot is human characters, right? There's a lot of focus on the different humans throughout the story of the Bible. And we have human characters that we fall in love with and ones that we really appreciate. But the problem when we focus on them as the primary drivers of the story is we end up kind of sorting them into two categories, the good characters and the bad characters. And we want to do what the good characters do, and we don't want to do what the bad characters do. But the problem is, throughout the story of the Bible, the human characters are sometimes good and bad, and sometimes they're good and bad at the same time. And the story isn't meant for us to look at them and then imitate their behavior. But when we focus on the human characters, we miss the point of the whole story in general. And that's to introduce us to the character and the person of God himself, and to watch him go through the process of redeeming the world. Right? Because that's what the authors are primarily focused on, is introducing God to us. The fourth thing is realizing that the story, the overarching story, limits how much we can read into any one piece of the Bible. Now, it's a little bit weird, and let me explain. What I mean by that is most people understand that you shouldn't take Bible verses out of context, right? When Jesus says, "Judge not lest you be judged," he's saying that in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, after he's just given the disciples a laundry list of things that they should be doing and thinking and behaving and shaping their attitudes around if they're going to be part of his kingdom. When we take that out of context and use it to stop people from criticizing us, we're not using or treating that Bible verse correctly. What I think a lot of people don't recognize is that applies on a larger scale as well. We've talked about Leviticus. Leviticus has a ton of laws about food and clothing and things that you and I just don't think about in an everyday basis. The problem is then we miss the significance of what's going on in Leviticus and the food laws and the purity laws because we're ignoring their role in the story. And in fact, we take them out of context when we make them just about some old law that Jesus did away with. We have to recognize that the book of Leviticus and its holiness codes have a role to play in the overarching story of the Bible. The same is true of Paul's letters in the New Testament. He tends to write a bunch of stuff that we want to apply directly to our lives because he says a lot of you should do this and you should do that, and it's after Jesus rose from the dead, and that's where we're at now in history, right? And so it's all directly applicable to us. But what we forget is that those letters are embedded in the story. It's Paul writing to a specific church in a specific historical context. We have to allow the overarching story to set limits on how we read all of the pieces. We cannot take them out of context, out of the overarching story. The fifth thing that I think I see people do quite a bit, and you see this all the time in internet discourses and conversations about politics or social issues, or even just whether or not we should, pick red carpet or blue carpet for the church sanctuary. A lot of people come to the Bible with questions that they want answers to. And it's understandable. If you've lived enough life, you have things that you wish you could explain, points of pain in your life, experiences that you want to have a better understanding on. And we come to Christianity, we come to God asking for answers to those things. And we look for those answers in the Bible. The problem is the Bible, most of the time, isn't interested in actually giving us answers to those specific questions. Instead, what the Bible is trying to do is it's trying to introduce us to the person and the character of God himself. And by following him through the story from Genesis all the way to Revelation, the way that the authors introduce him, limiting our experience to the way that the authors shape the story, we will encounter God the way he chose to reveal himself to us. And it's in the visceral nitty-gritty of experiencing the story, his story, alongside him, that we might grow in a better understanding of his character, his personality, and his approach to those very problems that we want answers to. After that, we may start developing a better sense of how God would respond to those situations, how God would respond to those problems, or how God's perspective of those problems might shape our own. The Bible is not, like I said, a magic 8-ball where you can shake it, ask a question, and it'll give you its answer. The Bible is a story trying to introduce us to the person of God. And that's it. Now, I say that's it as if that means it's not very powerful. But the reality is that's the most powerful way, I think, to approach the text of Scripture. It will fundamentally transform how you ask questions, how you read, and how you approach the story, but it'll also fundamentally transform, I think, your experience of its main character, of God himself. We talk all the time about Christianity being a relationship with a real person, not some sort of religion. The problem is when we read the Bible, we treat it like a religious book and not like the tool that it is for us to engage with a real living person. So there you go. 5 bad habits that I think Christians have when they read the Bible, and 5 ways to address them. When we ask on this show, what is the author trying to do? It's for those reasons. The Bible is a story. It's the most powerful story, and it will fundamentally transform not just your understanding of Christianity or of faith or of God himself, but it'll also fundamentally transform your understanding of yourself as you recognize the God who is trying to speak to you through his own story.